Let's talk supply chain. So welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm thrilled to be here. I've been following you for a long time, so it's kind of a starstruck moment for me. So thanks for having us.
Oh, well, I appreciate all your support, and I'm excited to have you here. I mean, this is the first in a three-part series together, and collaborations like this are one of my favorite things to do because one episode always leaves me wanting more. I'm sure it leaves the audience wanting more as well. I'm a bit of a supply chain nerd, and I always have more questions. So I'm thrilled that we're going to have that opportunity. And today we're going to get going with a bit of an introduction into Relish before we dive deeper together into some really, really important topics that I know the audience is going to want to tune in for. So let's start by talking about the topic that's making me hungry. Why did you call the company Relish?
Yeah, you can imagine we get that question
All the
at least,
time.
yeah, all the time, daily at least, usually more frequent. Well, I guess going back to those days, I think when you start a company, you kind of have two ways you can kind of go about branding. One is like be very specific. And so for us, that would probably have been something like procurementapps.com, which, you
Okay.
know, that isn't awesome. So we went more the abstract route and we looked at all sorts of things. And while I'm more of a mustard and ketchup guy personally, relish just really stood out to us as a word that can create a certain emotion. If you think about the word relish and maybe yourself or people we've talked to, it usually invokes, the idea of relishing something, loving something, needing something, is sort of one track. And then the other one is like the backyard barbecue, which is personally where I went with it to begin with, is Sunday afternoon, midsummer barbecue in the backyard with your family, maybe your closest friends. So in either way, it creates, we hope, an emotion of like, I want that. I could use that.
Mhm.
So.
And you can't get any better than a backyard barbecue. I think when we were preparing for this collaboration, we had my team on there, your team on there, and I think most of my team went to that backyard barbecue thing too. Well, I love the name and I'm glad that you gave us the background behind it. But now I want to talk about your background and your journey with Relish. What does that look like? Have you been in procurement or supply chain your whole career?
Yeah, a little bit by accident. So when I left school, I got a job at the time a super regional bank that kind of got caught up in the '08 crisis. Different podcast. But I got hired into a position to be a program manager for this Ariba procurement project, and I can barely spell either of those at the time. But fell in love with it. I mean, at that time, this is like 2003, 2004. The internet's still kind of new. Web-based catalogs are still kind of new. So it's like the freshest thing. And here I am on the front lines being able to help design and make decisions for a relatively large organization on how they're going to conduct procurement on the internet, not even the cloud, right? Just the internet. So I fell in love with it. And, not long after that, got into the consulting world and spent 15 years deploying all sorts of solutions, both technology, process, people, change management, and just watched the perception of procurement go from people who like buy stuff to a strategic function from analytics and sourcing all the way through invoicing and payment.
Right.
So yeah, I've been there the whole time, learned a lot, been in a lot of buildings as a consultant on those things, and then just sort of got to a point where we as a team felt we could apply a lot of those learnings that now we have a macro experience on into a product setting, and that's really where Relish started.
Amazing, amazing. And I know all the procurement professionals who are listening to this are like, yes, we are a strategic function. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, well, let me just pontificate for a second then,
Sure.
because there's all of this social media and push by some of the folks in the industry to like make procurement cool or we should love procurement. People like we're already there. Like there's no more marketing, there's no more campaigns that we have to do to convince ourselves that we are a strategic function. We are, but we have been for a very long time. Take it from a guy who's been in a lot of buildings, deploying a lot of solutions, talked to a lot of CPOs, CIOs, CTOs. We don't need to push that message anymore. We're already there. So I'll stop
So
there.
love it, own it, be that procurement professional or hero, right?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, procurement, supply chain, like it's the heartbeat of nearly any company, like industry agnostic. And
Mhm.
that's again another podcast, so I'll stop. But I love what I do. So
Well, I love your passion. I mean, it comes through the screen. It comes through what we're talking about today. So, and this is pardon the pun, okay? Because I think my team put this together. So, what's the solution that we should all be relishing? Give us an introduction to who you are, what you do, how you help your customers at Relish.
first of all, I'm deeply disappointed in your team. I think we could have done better. Just kidding.
Oh, there might be more. There might be more. Give it
Oh,
time.
great. I got a couple of dad jokes I can sneak in if we have to balance it here. Really simply what Relish does is like we're an app company. I think that's the easiest way to explain it for everyone. So as you know, we all have phones today and we download apps for whatever reason. If you didn't like the Apple Music app, you probably downloaded Spotify. And so that's really the role we play, is to extend what is your iOS or your procurement platform to do additional things that you wish it did. I guess our rooted problem statement is procurement solutions, ERPs, just enterprise tech in general doesn't do all the things that customers, users would like it to do. Saw that, heard that firsthand as a consultant. And so our whole premise is to come in and extend those platforms in a collaborative way
Huh.
to ensure customers maximize their investments in their IT infrastructure.
That is cool. So you're taking what everybody's doing on a desktop and you're putting it on their phone.
Yeah, yeah. And really trying to meet users where they are. I
Yeah.
think a lot of folks that have succumbed to the I'll just create a workaround or Excel can do that for me. And our position on that, not to be too direct, is like bullcrap. Like enough of that. You should expect more. You should demand more from your enterprise software to be a conductor of what it's doing, not it
Mhm.
telling you what you should do. So for example, when any website you go to or any platform you use, you can get stuck somewhere, right? Like you're not allowed to go forward until you fix the alphanumeric field or fill in a field. We think in our position is like, let's flip that. Like, let's tell our computers what we want to do and tell them
Mhm.
what information we have and conduct business, not being told how to conduct ourselves. So
Interesting. I don't know if you saw the recent story about Formula One racing and how um, they had like 20,000 lines on an Excel spreadsheet and they were they were doing procurement and their supply chain and all of that from an Excel spreadsheet. And I think I could hear all of the procurement professionals sort of pulling out their hair going, really? And they felt so bad for the people that had to deal with this Excel spreadsheet and all of those lines, but they couldn't keep on top of everything. They couldn't figure out what was a priority, what had been ordered, what hadn't been ordered, what did they have in stock. And it just painted the picture of a bit of a nightmare scenario using, and they actually said that it was one of the most dangerous softwares out there.
yeah. Well, I mean, there's a well-known stat out there, like 5% of revenue from companies is lost due to fraudulent activity.
Right.
Uh, and that's one of the areas that Relish, has a solution for. That's just an example. Like there's too many, workarounds, stale processes out there. And we all know like technology is accelerated and continues to accelerate. I know we'll talk about AI
Mhm.
maybe in a little bit of time, but that's kind of the root of what Relish was started. Was there's an end to this story that is a lot more positive, automated, safe, economical than Excel workbooks and workarounds. So
Yeah. Well, let's continue this discussion because I want to know about your customers. We know that you work with enterprise customers, but should they be within a certain industry or location? Do you have an ideal client that you can share with us?
our solutions were built on common business process challenges. So, we don't have necessarily a vertical or a geography that we're better or worse in. Our customer base today, which is over 100 customers, runs the gamut of industry and location and size.
Mhm.
But there are vertical based challenges. If you think about the healthcare industry, they deal with HIPAA, right? So how do you
Mhm.
get around that from an invoice perspective? If you think about like oil and gas, financial services, regulated industries, essentially, they have a supplier data responsibility higher than some other verticals. So when we built our solutions, it was with the mind of like, these are problems everyone has. but there is uniqueness to the challenge based on who they are. And so we've tried to build a very flexible platform that accounts for those scenarios.
Well, and I think during doing my research for this particular episode, I think you say that enterprise solutions rarely meet all the requirements. And I think that that is very true. I've seen it time and time again. I've had lots of conversations, and it really is a part of why so many organizations kind of have ended up in the mess that they're in with technology, data, visibility, because it seems like, you have to have a new solution for every new problem, and then the tech stacks just end up like higher than the Empire State Building in some cases, and become such a mess. I kind of think about when the telephone was introduced and you had the person sitting there and sort of like putting in the different lines for who wanted to talk to who, when I paint a picture of it and think about it in my mind. So give us your perspective on enterprise software challenges. How have they been compounded by industry challenges and changes that we've kind of seen over the last few years?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think first is like history. I think there's a lot to learn from history. So if you think about the advent of the ERP, you go back to the 60s and 70s, you had giant buildings with tape machines running and air conditioning,
Mhm.
and then here comes ERP in the 80s, right? Which was supposed to be, and at the time, I suppose, was like the end-to-end be all, your finance, your treasury, your HR all in
Mhm.
one place. Amazing. Then you get to 2000, 2001, and depending who you want to thank for the internet, Al Gore or somebody else, the military, internet, right? And, the cloud era in 2008, 2010. And here we are on the cusp of the AI revolution. So I think there's the natural progression of technology that the time between point A and point B keeps getting shorter because innovation's happening faster. So I think that's part of the story, is like we've outgrown applications very quickly because innovation is happening like on a month-to-month basis now. So something that worked 6 months ago that was whiz bang, brand new, like could be redundant, by September. So I think that's one of the challenges. If I go back to the traditional in the last 15, 20 years of like an ERP install and some sort of procurement cloud app that goes on top of it and interacts with it from an integration standpoint, I think there's no one to blame. There's no fault to be given, but the reality is it's presented as it'll do everything you want and cut your grass.
Right.
And the customers sort of take that at face value and they build a business case and they build an ROI case and they never meet it, right? And that I don't think there's blame there. I think there's a perception issue of if you're promising to deliver value across 10, 12 different business processes, you probably can't deliver it at the level of detail
Mhm.
uh,
For
that
all.
for all.
Yeah.
And then I think on the customer side, it's being rational and saying, you know what, like, especially in today's world, like this one big thing may not be enough for us, right? And there's
Mhm.
companies where it's going to be good enough, but there's a number that it's like we need something more advanced in the sourcing area or in the payment area or in the supplier area. So like we've coached our customers and previously in consulting in our client base that the one size fits all mentality of technology doesn't work. And I think
Mhm.
we've all proven that to ourselves over time. So
Yeah.
have an open mind and put the puzzle together in a way that maximizes your value and can almost guarantee the return on investment that you need. And then it's at the end of the day, it's the enterprise software partners, and Salesforce started it back in 2010, 11 with the Force.com platform, understanding and adopting partners like Relish that we can help you go faster, which makes your customers happier and predicts, renewals and customer growth.
So let's dive into a little bit of that because I want to know what you're doing differently, right? You're working to simplify, which I love. We got to keep it simple. To extend some of those solutions, bridge some of those gaps that we were just talking about in those challenges. What does that look like? Like, how does that work in real terms? Why would somebody look at working and partnering with Relish?
Yeah, no, another good question. I think it's rooted in business process challenge. So like, let's just get into one specific use case that I think everybody would understand. Um, Companies use suppliers, all
Yeah,
right?
a
Products and
lot of
services.
them sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of them. I've seen lists that go into the six digits.
Wow.
Um, and it's a relationship. And so you need to know information about that supplier before you ever do business, right? Who they are, where what their address is, what their bank information is, especially in today's world, if they're on a sanctions list, which can cause all sorts of problems. And then there's just this fraud cyber issue that we're all facing as well. So you have to be cognizant that not every supplier is who they say they are.
Right.
And so traditionally, like one of two things kind of happen at a company. One, they trust the supplier on face value when they submit their profile or fill out the form. And that's probably the worst, honestly, right? Like you're just sort of saying yes to everything and
Right.
qualifying the supplier based on what they told you.
Mm-hmm.
The second sort of use case is that you have a team of people that are in spot checking some of this information to make sure it seems to be true. So overall, like we feel like our risk is managed because we check some stuff.
Right.
Also not great. But in today's world, like when we do this as consumers and you fill out a form, like it's validating some of the things that you've said as you fill it out. We can do that for suppliers. And that's one of our solutions is the ability to say, this supplier has told us A, B, C, and D about itself. We've gone out to third-party sources, verified sources, and said that's accurate or not. And if it's not, here's the action we think you should take.
Right.
Think about like the risk mitigation, the fraud mitigation, the value that creates and productivity. That's just one example of how we complement enterprise software just work better and meet users where they are.
Well, and I like it that you brought up cybersecurity because it's something that should be top of mind for every supply chain professional, procurement professional. And one of the things that I was talking about just the other day is when you've got a variety of different suppliers with a variety of different systems, yours can be, very, very protected, but they can come in through some sort of sub technology that you are aligned with into your system and create chaos. So it's
Yep.
really, really important, like you said, to be able to vet those suppliers and the technology that they're using, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I can bring that to life with a real customer story. They had a supplier register, the data was verified,
Hmm.
they were a valid supplier at the time. Like many suppliers, addresses change, bank information can change. They had a
Right.
supplier change their bank information, after they're onboarded and contracted a year into the relationship. And turns out that was a bad actor that found a loophole or a backdoor into that profile, changed the bank information. I think it was a $400,000 payment went to a fraudulent actor acting
Wow.
on behalf of a valid supplier. So it's the due diligence isn't I checked them once and they're
Yeah.
good. It's when things like bank information changes, like you have to ask your like self the question, like, well, why are you changing it? And is this a valid bank change?
Yeah.
This is an example.
Yeah, well, and I've been through that too, as a supplier having to change like banking information and things like that. And some of the clients have, 4 or 5 different steps that I have to go to verify that the information, and some people don't. And, at first I was like, wow, that's a lot to go through, but now I really understand why it needs to happen because it's protecting not only themselves, it's also protecting me as well. So it's such an important conversation. I think we're going to be talking about that later on in one of the other episodes. But I also want to talk about partnerships because you work with partners. And on our next show together, you're going to be joined by Matt from SAP. So just give us a taste of what that partnership looks like, how you're making collaboration with some of the industry's biggest names work so successfully.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's definitely part of our model is to complement enterprise software. We're not trying to compete or replace SAP or others. So that's a grounded principle in the business model that we have. And then it's been a very collaborative, open conversation with partners like SAP of, there are things that you guys are really good at, and there's things you wish you could get
Mhm.
after, but you're building this mothership enterprise software, and there's 1,000 priorities every day, every quarter, every year.
Right.
Where we fit in is like working with their product teams, with their sales teams, and understanding like what would add the most value to your platform, to your customer base,
Hmm.
and we'll go build a solution for that. And that's
Cool.
been very successful across platforms because again, there's this acknowledgement with the speed of what things are moving at,
Hmm.
opening up the doors a little bit and having a partner ecosystem that can support your customer base and your platform is a tried and true strategy. And again, back to the phone,
Right.
right? Apple's vision was never to have you only use Apple apps on the Apple iOS. They always had this mindset, like we'll create an ecosystem where Spotify can exist against Apple Music.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back to the more commercial world, Salesforce did this in 2011, 12, the first one, force.com. And today they have over 5,000 app partners that are helping Salesforce customers be successful. So,
Amazing. Amazing. I
yeah, so
think
it's symbiotic.
Shopify is another example of that too, right?
Yeah, yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so symbiotic, right? Because you're helping your partner move a little bit faster. You're helping their customers be a little bit more successful. And then obviously for us, both those wins are ultimately good for Relish. So
Well, I can't wait to hear more about that in the next episode. But for this episode, you mentioned AI earlier on in this conversation, and AI is kind of everywhere right now. Everybody's talking about it, but I think it's also a big part of what you offer to help clients streamline and enhance. I believe one of your solutions won an AI Breakthrough Award in 2022, so congratulations. But talk to us about that, because the conversations I'm having around AI run the full gamut from, yes, I'm going to find a way to squeeze AI in there, like it or not, right through to no thanks, Excel till I die. Like, what is your take on this? And I feel like also people think that AI is going to solve their problem tomorrow, but it's really a journey. And you start today, and that journey is going to take you a little while.
yeah, yeah, no, it's a big topic. I think the first thing I would say, there's a lot of folks who present themselves as AI experts.
Mhm.
This is so new and it's moving so fast. Like there are no experts. And I think that's the most unsettling thing for everyone is usually we can Google or benchmark with Hackett or something about the thing we're looking at.
Mhm.
AI is so new and it moves so fast. Like there is no expert, there is no benchmark information. So I think just be grounded in that to some extent, that like we're all going to learn as we go to some extent. In terms of AI and how we're using it, large language models, the things you see with OpenAI, ChatGPT, as what Microsoft's doing with them, as well as, Bard, et cetera. Those are just giant sets of unstructured data that predicts the answer to the question that you're asking. And it's kind of word by word. So that's sort of like how we use it every day. And I think we've all interacted with it at some level, and seen it work and not work. So I think that's where some of the fear comes into play. In the commercial setting, in Workday, it's sort of coining this term of responsible AI, which, I think is really, really intelligent way to explain it. You're talking about unstructured data from a transaction standpoint inside of a business or a set of businesses that you can put structure to,
Mhm.
and you can apply it to a specific use case, an invoice, a supplier, sourcing event, a contract, et cetera. So I do think like I do know in our solutions, like we're using what I would call small language models, based on customer data that's masked to predict and help users take certain actions. As simple as training documentation. And I think everyone thinks about AI just performing a set of tasks for you so you don't have to do any work. AI can be used as simply as calling to a training document and understanding how to do something. How do I set up a meeting? How do I set up my commercial credit card? How do I set up a purchase order? So that's how we're using it today, is we're finding use cases where we see repetitive process that's fairly predictable and giving the user an option to set a rule.
Okay.
It's at the user discretion. Where I think this goes long term, again, no one's an expert, neither am I, but you have these large language models, you have the SAPs and Oracles and Coupas and Workdays of the world. They're sitting on massive amounts of transaction information. They're going to put those in their own large language model. And then it's how is that presented? And it's a crawl, walk, run. I think the first iteration is going to be similar to what Microsoft has done with a co-pilot, somebody that's on your screen that you can ask questions to. They'll take certain actions on your behalf or give you
Okay.
information. Once we all get comfortable with that, and that might take half a decade or more, then I think we get to autonomous processing. I think we get to a place where we're comfortable that the AI is smart enough to make decisions on my behalf based on my experience with it over a certain period of time. And you'll see AI assistance and autonomous processes happening company to company, supplier to supplier, supplier to buyer, in the next 10 years.
And it's not about how fast the technology can learn or be built. It's about how fast humans can actually get on board and get comfortable with what the solutions that it provides, which is just crazy to think about, right? We're kind of in our own way, but at the same time, do we really want it to go that fast, that quickly? One of the other big conversations right now is around customer experience and the experience of your customer's customer. So you focus on creating an amazing experience for your customers with an effective platform, partners, and lots of support. But you also prioritize speed to market so that your customers can service theirs. Can you talk to us about the chain of that experience and why was that so important as you built Relish, right? Because I mean, I talk about collaboration being the future of business all the time, and it really goes hand in hand of who is our, first tier customer, but then also who's that second tier, that third tier. Who are we impacting? Who are we touching?
Yeah, well, there's really two dimensions to that question. I think one is like, why did Relish build our product set in a way that it could be easily deployed?
Okay.
That's directly to our first line customers, right? I think that's just rooted in our history of understanding customers don't really want to go through another 6-month, $1 million implementation of stuff.
Yeah.
So one of the ways we're different, right, is it's easy to deploy, it's lightweight, and it's economical. So I think from a customer standpoint, go-to-market standpoint, that just made a ton of sense to us, and we knew
Mhm.
that's what customers wanted. I think the more important dimension, as you sort of outlined, is more on the how are they using it? How does that make business process more efficient and be a customer of choice, so to speak? To go back to the supplier example, having to manually validate data, you've got so the personas involved in that use case is there's probably a sourcing person that's trying to run an event, needs to get the supplier approved so they can put them in the event. The event's 2 weeks late. So there's some stress there. Like, why can't we just approve them
Yeah.
like they are? So that's sort of one persona. You got the supplier persona that is desperate to get into the bid or send the PO or whatever it might be. So there's just a ton of inefficiency there that, because we can automate it now in nanoseconds and automatically essentially approve that supplier if all checks out, there's an efficiency there that the supplier's happy because they're now in the bid. The sourcing person feels like they've been serviced by their internal supplier, being the supplier management organization. And that flows all the way down to payables, right? One of the most frequent phone calls finance gets is from a supplier saying, when am I going to get paid?
Right.
Where in the process of approval? Is there a problem? We take that on the invoice side completely out of play as well, where the supplier has on-demand updates to where their invoice process is. So even internally, we talk about customer first, and that doesn't mean actually customer. It means who is your customer.
Okay.
So like within Relish, product is a customer of sales, right? Within an organization, sourcing is a supplier to buyers, and finance is a supplier to buyers. So if you have
True.
that mindset of like left to right, up and down, how can we become more efficient, more automated? Then the whole process runs
Mhm.
much smoother, and there's just less emotion, less angst, and it's very objective, focused business process.
Well, I'm glad that you spoke about that because there's internal customers, there's external customers, and sometimes we forget about that. When we talk about
Yeah.
customers, we think about that external, but really internally, we all have to work together to make sure that it flows. And each department is kind of your internal customer, and it makes a difference not only to what they do on a day-to-day basis. But then it in turn makes a difference for you, and then in turn makes a difference for your external. So we're all linked, right? It's all a chain. We talk about supply chain, but we're
Yeah.
all linked in a variety of different ways. So let's talk about the clients that are really relishing your solutions. See, I told
Oh
you they
boy.
would do this again.
I might have to go on mute and laugh for a minute. That was so good.
So hold on. So this is your opportunity to share a case study. I know you shared one previously. But let's share another one. So talk to us about the challenge that they had, the solution that you provided. What was the ROI and benefits that we can all get a good feel for the impact that you're making for your clients?
Yeah, no, thanks. So, global financial institution. First problem statement is, hey, like, and for those that might not know, like, process invoices in Mexico requires a special process. So it has to be approved by the government. So
Oh,
sort of any bribery gate.
okay.
And so
Wow.
you can't process those invoices like you would in the US, for
Mhm.
example, or Canada. So that was their problem statement, relatively small volume, but we have as an extension solution, like we can solve that. So we started there with them. Then it went, we handled US and Canada. And then we went global with them and solved their invoice challenge. They were at 24% automation using their procurement stack and the network portal program they had. We took them to over 95%
Wow.
after 12 to 14 months. And again, that's sort of a maturation from like pretty specific geo of Mexico to kind of North America to globally. So it was kind of a step through process, but an obscene amount of automation that's largely unheard of. They play a huge role in that as well, working with their supply base, but our solution was able to tackle that.
Mhm.
And then we went on to the supplier use case, which I won't, say again, but they had that challenge as well. So we installed that application. And then we've just now released an AI tool, AI assistant tool that's going to help streamline not only the supplier process, the invoice process, but their entire source to pay process. And so that is a great example of why we went platform. We didn't
Mhm.
want to be a one-trick pony that solved one challenge. We felt like the root of all evil is in master data and transactional data and inefficiency. And so if we built a platform that had capabilities to go after that core problem, we could
Mhm.
manifest those as applications in invoicing, in supplier, in automation.
So 70% in 12 months. What did that mean for them?
Uh, it means they could make some FTE changes that they had hoped to make. And I'm not talking about reducing staff, reallocating staff to more strategic functions.
Huh.
Um, from a visibility standpoint, one of their core problems was visibility to essentially AP. And
Mhm.
so, contracted AP that Treasury needs to know what the cash on hand needs to be month over month, obviously. And so to get those invoices processed faster, it provided that reporting opportunity. And then they've since, with a third party, done a factoring supply chain finance program. Now that the invoices are being processed in days, they can take advantage of where they choose to discounts by paying suppliers early, or extending terms from a treasury standpoint, having longer term capital liquidity. So it
Amazing.
unlocks so much value on the invoice side. We've talked a little bit about the fraud prevention and the supplier side, but an invoice, if you think about it, is an asset,
Yeah.
right? It's a liability, but it's an asset if it's processed and used correctly to, again, take a discount or extend your terms. So they saw value in a number of ways. I think automation percentage was like the top KPI that unlocked the ability to do different things below that.
Amazing. I love that. Thank you for sharing that example. Now, I want to take us on a little bit of a sidestep to supply chain because a little birdie told me that you are into hockey. Now, I'm more of a baseball girl, but we won't let that come between us. So, who's your team? Are they winning? Are they going to win?
Okay, so as of the date of this broadcast, I'm a Detroit I'm a Detroit Red Wings fan. I was at the game last night where they were down 4-1 in the second period to Montreal and won 5-4 in overtime. So as of today, they are in a playoff position. They have one game left, which is tonight in Montreal. They need some other things to happen. So I'd say they're doing fine. In 24 hours, I'll tell you if I'm happy or sad.
What are you
Yeah.
predicting though? Because by the time this comes out, it may
Oh,
be close to like playoffs or like the end of playoffs, the Stanley Cup. What's your prediction?
okay, so I'll say I like the Tampa Bay Lightning to win the cup. I
Oh,
think I think Edmonton will be there in the final. Will my Red Wings get into the playoffs? I don't think so. I
oh,
hate,
boo.
yeah, and this is going to be on the internet. So
It
I'm
will.
just joking, Red Wings. Let's go. Um, and
So
a
feel
quick shout out.
free to leave your comments about hockey.
Yes. Yeah, I would, as much as I love to talk about relish, that's definitely my number one. Like I can talk about hockey for weeks on end. Quick shout out to the Cleveland Barons, where my two boys play. Great hockey program here based in Cleveland, Ohio. So
I love that. And, some people are going to judge me because they're going to be like, you're a Canadian, you live in Canada. Why don't you like hockey? It's just never been my thing. I mean, I watch my nephews play and I love watching them play and I think it's great, but it's just not my thing. So I hope your predictions come true and that we're going to have some awesome comments for this particular conversation. All right. Last but not least, let's bring it back to supply chain. This is our last question. What does the future hold? Like, what do you think are some of the challenges and opportunities that you foresee for your clients over the next year? What new innovations can they expect from maybe Relish to even help with that?
Yeah, no, obviously AI, I think if there's any doubters, AI is here. It's going to change things. And, we've heard this story before with crypto as an example and blockchain. But AI is here to stay. I think everyone's sort of wrapped their heads around that. So I think that's the biggest next thing is like, how do I use in the short term, how do I use AI responsibly in my organization to, it's not just say I do AI, but to like affect something, automation, productivity, security, risk mitigation, whatever that might be. I think we will see the beginning of the next advent of that history story of from tapes to ERPs to cloud to platforms into the app ecosystem becoming even larger. So orchestration is a buzzword I don't necessarily believe in, but it's an example of what we're doing versus like platforms versus orchestration. There's the next gen of how do we work with these core procurement apps in a more meaningful, automated, data-rich way.
Mhm.
So ultimately, that's where I know we're going to be having our conversations in the next 6 to 12 to 18 is how do I use AI responsibly? What other components, if I used, would change my business? And then ultimately, as you said very perfectly, when are we going to be ready? That's the big question as individuals.
Yeah, so many things to look out for. And I loved this conversation. But Relish will be back for 2 more episodes with us, and they'll be joined by a few very special guests. So next time Ryan will be back and he's going to be joined by Matt Montgomery of SAP, and we're going to be talking about suppliers, like a really important element to any business, but why is supplier information so hard to get a hold of? Why is it such a challenge to validate and nearly impossible to maintain? We're going to dive into the DNA of a supplier profile, breaking down the challenges and solutions, exploring how to assess and manage risk, and talking about how technology, especially AI, fits into all of that. So make sure that you come back for the second episode because it's going to be filled with insights that you can take away and implement in your business. And did you have a guess at today's big question? Well, at the top of the show, I asked you, how much did a vulnerability in financial validation cost the Toyota Boshuko Corporation back in 2019? Well, an intricate scam led to a huge $37 million loss. A timely reminder that in our digital age, vulnerability is just one location can have rather large ripple effects across the entire ecosystem. If you want to find out more about Relish, go to relishiq.com. A massive thanks to Ryan for joining me and to the team at Relish for making this episode happen. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today.